I'm a designer, a computer scientist, a sociologist, if you want. I spent a couple of years working with Bruno Latour in Paris, and one of my research topic is the mapping of controversies, especially the mapping of public debates. And so at a certain moment with some colleagues, I was thinking about the representation of the time in terms, I mean, I was working on the representation of subjects of a debate. And so, I'm working with the networks. So network are usually simply points, lines, and so on. And what we miss a lot in network visualization is the temporal dimension. So I wanted to investigate this, starting from data. And I'm also affiliated to the Berkman Klein Center. And in the moment I was in contact with Fernando Bermejo, the director of the Media Cloud, and they discovered this beautiful tool that you see in my share screen. And basically, it's a tool collecting newspaper articles from the start of the internet. And what is incredible for me is that you can basically run queries like you do in Google, but on the newspapers of the past and of course of the present. And so my first exercise here is an exercise of mapping starting from media and more precisely from newspapers present on the internet. So you see the interface, and basically you can run a query, and my query for today is data and democracy and digital, which means I ask the system to look all the newspapers article with these keywords. My source of data is the United States press, and the enter dates are just the last year. So basically, what you can get from this system is the attention over time on this subject, and you have the total attention, basically the number of article about this with these words, because the research is really structured. And then you can have some information about the article, a few samples, which are good to know if your research is good or bad. And if you click on info, basically you get some metadata. And so you can get the organizations cited in the article, the people mentioned in the article, and also the places. So my question was how to present this in temporary dimension, especially focusing on individual. So there is always a question of a representation and exclusion, but basically starting from the newspaper articles, from a large amount of articles, you can create a map like this one. Okay, it's very complex, but the metric is very simple. In this map, I just wanted to show the individuals when they are mentioned together on the same paper. So for example, so basically you have a distribution of people on the space, and when two individuals are close each other, it means that they are mentioned often in this selection of articles. So I have just a few examples, and then we can take the time to explore everything. So for example, it makes sense that Bolsonaro and Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva are close in this map because they are often cited together. Another example, which is pretty evident, is related to current US politics. So you have a kind of a cloud where you have Donald Trump, Bin Laden, Nancy Pelosi, and so on. And basically, I use this metaphor of the weather maps to measure if an actor, an individual, is taking place in the conversation, or is she disappearing. So for example, we can check the frequency of people. Of course, this is a demo and it's just run on 3 years, so the frequency analysis is not so precise. But what is interesting is that I created a different representation of these newspaper articles, just showing the people mentioning in it. And then, of course, we are playing with the data. So if you think about the process of datification, you have in this information, you have newspapers, and then you have a journalist interested in some specific subject who write articles that are published on the web, and then on the web we can read them, but also the machine can read them, and then we can run a text analysis on that to extract individual places and so on. And what is nice from this kind of maps is that you offer a different way to the user to analyze a large amount of information. And so you have the completely chain of work. And what is interesting for me is even to use the zoom as a metaphor to go back to the articles. So for example, we can choose Joe Biden, and here we have a sample of the articles. We have the frequency, the trend of Biden, of course, is often in these articles, and you can open the article. So basically, you can see the starting point of the data and give, for example, and this is a nice concept that we can discuss further, a little bit of transparency of the work of mapping we are doing. So again, this is a kind of instrument to investigate public debates, starting from a query run on the media cloud. And this is my very short presentation.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here with Becky Lance again, my friend. And I was asked to talk a little bit of what is the Brazilian or Latin American perspective of someone who's been an activist for digital rights in the past 10 years, and what has changed in our perceptions of the field, our perceptions of what is the meaning of digital rights, what is the meaning of personal data. So I will just talk a little bit about the kind of work that we do. Let me just share the screen as well as Dario did, so you can all understand. So Data Privacy Brazil is an NGO founded 2 years ago. Previously, I worked for Internet Lab, the Brazilian Institute of Consumer Defense, and we created this coalition called Direitos na Rede, Rights in the Network, in 2016, which began with 12 members, now has 55 members. I think it's one of the biggest coalitions of digital rights in the world. And we were all heavily involved in the work of building internet framework for civil rights, which was the Marco Civil da Internet, of famous legislation in 2014 that was enacted after a big work that took at least 8 years, from 16 to 14. Also involved a strong collaboration between some Italian thinkers like Stefano Rodotà. Dario might remember him, with Gilberto Gil and the members of the Lula government. It was a great moment of high expectations of the future of the internet, of an open internet, and so on. I think this positive image of the internet, of data, changed completely. Even the literature, things that we used to read, like Manuel Castells, or the power of the network, or mass communications, and how it could be used to achieve democracy, changed completely, because the internet economy began a surveillance economy heavily dependent on the monopoly of big tech firms. And there is a clear perception that we are not equal in our exercises of rights. This was also a strong exercise that we did at Data Privacy Brazil, to realize that if we're talking about digital rights in Brazil, we must tackle the issues of social inequalities and power symmetries in the first place. We're talking about a very racist society, a society based in machismo, on violence against women. We're talking about deep inequalities within our society. So the kind of exercise of rights that you can have are completely different if you are a young Black person in the periphery of Rio de Janeiro, or if you are like a white medium class guy in Sao Paulo who attended the best law school in your country, and now you have a nice work internationally situated. So the kind of work that we do, which is hard in order to promote this culture of data protection, is to first of all to think about those inequalities. And I think there is this critical turn in the field of personal data protection and a whole literature on critical data studies, a whole literature on the political economy of the data, which emerged in the past, I don't know, 5 to 7 years, which are extremely important to think critically on the power of data, on how we are also products, so to speak, and we are constantly producing data, and the difficulties of trying to exercise those rights in individual terms. This is the biggest problems in the profiling economy and how it works. Like, it doesn't matter like who is Laura Garcia, who is Becky Lentz, who is Dario. What truly matters is to extract value from metadata and from profiling techniques and machine learning that are looking to social groups. So extracting value from the kind of patterns of social relations that might emerge and how that can be used to foresee potential movements and to change behavior of social groups. So being stuck in the classical liberal framework of the individual rights will not work at all. The biggest challenge of the field is to develop new collective ideas of how can we exercise those rights collectively and what we can do. So this is extremely hard. I would just talk about 2 things on the kind of work that activists are doing in Brazil regarding data. So this is the work we did on the project called The Virus and the Data, in which we were investigating how during the pandemics, Brazilian cities were using new kinds of technologies, how they were used. This was a project based in freedom of information requests to more than 600 cities in the country. You can see a big concentration in the state of Sao Paulo in the kind of technologies that are being used for monitoring people, for contact tracing, and so on. And we were interested as well in understanding like which cities and what kind of contracts were being used and what kind of technology was being hired by those cities. Because everything happened so fast, like in 1 year, 1.5 years, you had all those donations of technology to the public sector, and everything was moving really fast. We wanted to grasp that and to understand through data visualization the patterns of donations. What really surprised us was the role of domestic firms. So if you can see in this graph here, In Loco, which is a firm based in the Northeast, was this the company that had the majority of those contracts and donations to all the cities in Brazil. And this is a farm to like do research and to use data to better understand and visualize what is going on. So we did different techniques of data visualization to do this kind of awareness, this public awareness of the problems of those contracts and how we are also being traced and surveilled. A final example I'll give, which is a more optimistic one, is on the uses of open source intelligence. So this is a project of a partner from the Latin American Network of Surveillance Studies in Rio de Janeiro, and a project on how police officers in Rio were executing people through helicopters and shooting people in poor neighborhoods. This was a big project with a combination of data that could be extracted from Google Maps, photographs of people that were taken on Instagram, in order to identify patterns and to use this knowledge of open source intelligence to try to get precisely the idea of who was responsible for the murder in Rio de Janeiro. As you know, Rio de Janeiro is an extremely violent city, and we have many cases of Black people being killed by the police officers. Obviously, there's no accountability, and police officers are not in charge for what they did. So there is a whole use of data by activists on the ground, trying to recombine it and make a case that there was a case of violence and those police officers can be accountable and responsible. So usually when we talk about open source intelligence, many people are concerned about effects on surveillance and effects on individuals, but we are very cautious on also emphasizing the role of open source intelligence for this kind of activism, this kind of data journalism that can be done by civil society. This is just to highlight one of the many possibilities of using data by civil society in our context. Thank you.